Claire laughed at this guardsman, convinced it was all just a harmless joke. But that night, someone knocked on her door, and by morning, the unexplainable had already happened. London, Buckingham Palace, a symbol of tradition, discipline, and order. Here, among the neatly trimmed lawns and majestic facades, they stand, the royal guards, tall, motionless, like living statues, clad in scarlet uniforms and crowned with towering bearskin hats. Their silent presence transports you to another era, an era of honor, duty, and unwavering loyalty. But, of course, tourists don't care about that. Crowds swarm in front of the palace, cameras in hand, capturing everything in sight. Some stand in awe of the building's grandeur. Others attempt a selfie with the stoic guards. And then there are those, like our so-called heroine, who believe the world owes them something. Claire, a seemingly decent name. But her personality? Well, let's just say she's always had a strange idea of what's acceptable and what's not. She saw herself as bold, daring, the kind of person who pushes boundaries and creates a spectacle for content. The internet had taught her one thing: attention is everything. The more people watching, the better. And so Claire stands before a guard, squinting in the bright London sun, lazily chewing gum. "You ready, Jay?" She calls out to her friend, who already regrets coming along. "Are you recording?" Jay doesn't answer. He feels uneasy. How could he not? In front of them stands a guardsman, the embodiment of military discipline, his icy gaze fixed on nothing. Within him lie years of training, composure, and a strict code of honor, and in front of him stands Claire. Yeah, what a contrast. She narrows her eyes and steps closer. The crowd murmurs. People already know what she's planning. They've seen people like Claire before, self-important tourists who think the world is their amusement park, that the guards are just living mannequins, props to be poked, prodded, and harassed for a few thousand likes. Claire smirks, throwing a smug glance at the camera before stepping right up to the guard. The crowd holds its breath. This is it. The show begins. She leans in as if inspecting his face. "Are you real?" she drawls, feigning curiosity as she pretends to check his pulse. The guard remains still. "Hello? Anyone home?" She snaps her fingers inches from his nose. The crowd tenses. Someone has already started recording. People know what could happen next, but Claire doesn't. She keeps going. Now come the faces. She grins, makes silly expressions, mugs for the camera, trying to force some kind of reaction. But the guard doesn't even blink. And that infuriates Claire. She's used to getting reactions, used to people laughing, responding, even negatively. But this? Indifference? And then a dumb idea pops into her head. She takes another step, and then, snap, reaches out and grabs the guard's nose. The world freezes. Absolute silence. Even the ever-present hum of London fades for a second. Jay goes pale. The camera nearly slips from his hands. The crowd collectively gasps. And Claire? Claire is still smiling, because she thinks this is funny, but her laughter stops, because the guard moves. A sharp, precise step forward. "Stand back, sir!" His voice slices through the square, cutting straight to the bone. Claire flinches, stumbling backward, finally beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, she went too far. The crowd murmurs. Someone covers their mouth in shock. Everyone knows. If a guardsman moves, you've crossed the line. Claire lets out a nervous laugh, raising her hands. "Oh, come on, don't be so serious." But he doesn't blink. His gaze, cold, sharp, cuts straight through her. And then, without another word, he returns to position, as if nothing happened. But something did. Oh, something definitely did. Claire stands frozen, pretending not to be shaken, but her legs tremble ever so slightly. The crowd is silent. That's the thing. No one laughs. No one cheers her on. Instead, tension fills the air. People exchange glances. Someone shakes their head. She expected applause. Instead, she got silence. As someone walks past, they mutter, "You just made a huge mistake." And for the first time in a long while, Claire has no witty comeback. She doesn't realize yet how right they are, but she will, very soon. London at night is lively and chaotic, but there's a certain charm in the hustle. Tourists scatter into pubs and restaurants. Streetlights cast a warm glow, and the air is thick with the scent of rain and sizzling street food. Claire sat at a wooden table in a Soho pub, lazily stirring her cocktail. Around her, laughter, clinking glasses, quiet conversations. Everything was going according to plan. She had her content. Now it was time to celebrate, rack up views, and move on. Her phone screen glowed with the video, the moment she grabbed the guard's nose. She watched and smirked. One thought filled her mind. This was a success. By tomorrow, the video would be viral, flooded with comments and emojis, her followers praising her fearlessness. Jay sat across from her, sipping his beer without enthusiasm. Unlike Claire, he wasn't looking at his phone. He was watching her. Something about her smug expression irritated him. He played the video again, rewound, slowed it down. There it was. Claire doing her stunt. The guard standing still, everything as expected. But just before she touched him, the guard's head moved ever so slightly, so quick and subtle that at normal speed no one would notice. But slowed down? It was unmistakable. Jay narrowed his eyes and scrubbed further through the video. At the very last second, when Claire stepped back, something flashed in the cafe window behind her. A reflection. A familiar red uniform. He froze. How? How could the guard be there when he was just in front of her? His grip tightened around his glass. He looked back at Claire, who sipped her drink, blissfully unaware of his growing unease. The pub felt quieter. Jay glanced out the window. People moved along the street, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone stood still among them. Watching. Ridiculous. It was nothing. Claire's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Without thinking, she answered and put it to her ear. Silence. Then a low, raspy voice spoke 3 words. "Why are you laughing?" She yanked the phone away as if burned. The screen went black. No call record. Claire frowned. Stupid. Of course it was a prank. Someone must have seen the video and decided to mess with her. She should have laughed it off, posted about it, made more content. But she didn't. The night air was cool, yet Claire felt an odd heat in her chest. They walked down a nearly empty street, blending into the late-night stragglers. London was winding down, leaving only distant voices, the screech of tires, and glowing windows. And yet, she kept replaying that moment. The slight movement in the video. Something about it felt wrong. She glanced down a side alley. At the far end, beneath a flickering street lamp, stood a figure. Tall, motionless, exactly like before. Claire swallowed hard, blinking. The figure was gone. Her fingers tightened around her phone. Ridiculous. Just her imagination. They turned the corner, vanishing into the alleyway. Behind them, where no one was looking, the sound of footsteps echoed. Steady. Measured. 1, 2. 1. 2. Like a guardsman marching to his post. The London night smelled of damp stone and history. The city was winding down, shop lights dimming, streets emptying. Yet, even in the silence, Claire felt something off. Her own footsteps echoed dully on the pavement, but behind them another sound followed, measured, rhythmic. 1, 2, 1, 2. She told herself it was just coincidence, just her imagination. But every time she quickened her pace, the footsteps followed suit. Claire wasn't ready to admit she was afraid. Her instincts screamed that she wasn't alone, but her rational mind insisted, "Don't be ridiculous." Believing in ghosts was foolish. Logic ruled. She spun around. Nothing. Just an empty street, bathed in yellow lamplight. A few distant pedestrians, oblivious to her unease. Jay walked beside her, unaware of the growing fear tightening in her chest. But in the reflection of a store window, she saw him. A tall figure in a red uniform, still as a statue. Impossible. She blinked, and the reflection was gone. Stupid. She tore her gaze away, inhaling deeply. There's nothing there. Nothing happened. Everything's fine. By the time they reached their hotel, her first instinct was to lock the door. She turned the key quickly, pressed her back against the wood, and squeezed her eyes shut. Safe. Just nerves. Just an adrenaline crash. The room was silent. Too silent. She tossed her bag aside, peeled off her jacket, wiped her damp palms on her jeans. It's over. It's done. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She didn't want to answer. She shouldn't answer. But her finger pressed the button on its own. Silence. And then, a voice. Slow. Hollow. As if rising from beneath the earth. You shouldn't have done that. She slammed the phone down, fingers trembling. It slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. It's a joke. Someone messing with her. Someone saw the video and decided to scare her. Then why was her heart pounding so hard? Why did the hairs on her arms stand on end? Why, in the mirror across the room, did it seem like something was moving behind her? Claire turned her head. Nothing. But the feeling didn't fade. That heavy, unseen presence was still there. She didn't remember falling asleep. Her mind flickered between exhaustion and fear, until finally, darkness took her. And in her dreams, she was still in the hotel room, still in bed, unable to move. But she knew he was there, standing by her bedside, tall, motionless, watching. Claire woke in suffocating silence. The room was dark, but not the familiar kind of dark. Not soft, not natural. This darkness was thick, heavy, like the air itself had changed. She sat up suddenly, gasping for breath. Something was wrong. The hotel room looked normal. Her bag by the door, her jacket draped over the chair, her phone on the bedside table. Everything exactly as she left it. But that awful feeling hadn't left. She listened. Silence. And then, knock, knock. Soft, slow, deliberate. It took her a moment to realize where it was coming from. Her heartbeat slammed in her chest as she turned her head. Knock, knock, at the window. Something inside her snapped. No, that wasn't possible. Her room was on the 3rd floor. There was no way anyone could be outside. She didn't want to look, but her eyes moved on their own. And he was there. The black bearskin hat, the red uniform, the stiff, unmoving posture. The guardsman. He stood on the other side of the glass, watching her. Claire's breath hitched. Don't move. Don't react. This isn't real. But he was there. She shut her eyes tight, counted to 5. When she opened them, he was gone. But now, the knock came from the door, slow, measured. Knock, knock. Claire couldn't move. Terror locked her in place. Her phone vibrated again. Unknown number. The door handle rattled. Claire snatched up the phone, trembling hands pressing the answer button. Silence. And then, "Open the door!" She screamed, ending the call, flinging the phone across the room. No. No. This wasn't real. It was just a prank, a cruel joke. But outside, in the hallway, footsteps, heavy, precise. 1, 2, 1, 2, like a soldier on duty. Claire pressed herself against the wall, hand clamped over her mouth to silence her own breath. The footsteps stopped, right outside her door. She heard someone standing there, waiting. 1 minute. 2. Nothing. Claire shut her eyes. This isn't happening. This isn't real. She didn't remember falling asleep. Maybe stress knocked her out. Maybe her body just gave in. But when morning came, the first thing she saw was a small black footprint by the door. And the door she knew she locked, was slightly ajar. Claire woke up with a jolt, as if someone had yanked her by the shoulder. Her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't remember falling asleep. The last thing she recalled, the knocking at the door, the footsteps in the hallway. He was here. But now, everything looked normal. The dim morning light seeped through the curtains, casting a pale glow over the room. At first glance, nothing had changed, but 2 things stood out immediately. First, the door. It was open, by a few inches. And second, the dirty, sharp imprint of a black boot on the carpet, right by the threshold. A chill crawled up her spine. She stared at the footprint, desperately searching for a logical explanation. Someone had been here. Maybe hotel staff? No, they wouldn't enter while a guest was sleeping. Maybe Jay? But he would have knocked. She shot up from the bed, strode toward the door, exhaled sharply, and slammed it shut. She needed to leave. Now. On autopilot, she grabbed her phone. Dozens of notifications, but her eyes locked onto one, a message from an unknown number. She opened it, and her heart skipped a beat. Why didn't you open the door? Her palms went clammy. This isn't a joke. This isn't a game. She yanked on her jacket, grabbed her phone and keys. The door, the hallway, the elevator, they all blurred past. She stormed into the hotel lobby, spotted Jay, and grabbed his arm. "We're leaving." He didn't ask why. He already knew. The cold London air should have been refreshing, but Claire felt like she couldn't breathe. They moved quickly through the streets, heading toward the station. Cars, people, the city's noise. It all became a meaningless blur. Claire kept glancing over her shoulder. Every stranger in the distance seemed wrong. Every tall man in a dark coat felt familiar. She felt watched. They were watching. She kept repeating to herself, "This is paranoia. This is fear." Until she saw him. Across the street, standing in the archway between 2 buildings. Tall, red uniform, watching her. Claire's fingers dug into Jay's arm, her whole body tensing. Jay followed her gaze, but when he looked, there was no one there. "Claire." Jay's voice was tight. "You need to calm down." She wasn't listening. She knew he was there. She knew they never left. By the time they reached the train station, Claire let out a relieved breath. All that was left was to buy a ticket, get on a train, and leave. That's it. It would all be over. The line at the counter moved slowly, but that was fine. It gave her a moment to breathe. Her eyes flicked to the large departure board. And then she froze. Among the normal train times and destinations, one line stood out. Post change, 12 unquack. Same font, same layout. Her stomach dropped. She blinked. It wasn't there before. It couldn't have been. She whipped around, scanning the crowded station. And there they were. 3 figures in red coats, standing motionless, blending into the chaos, until she noticed them. And then, all at once, they turned their heads, straight at her. Her throat closed. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She wanted to run, but her feet were glued to the floor. She could only watch, and watch, and watch. Claire doesn't remember how she got outside. Her memory was just a mess of sounds. The station's noise, Jay's voice, the murmur of people. It all blurred together into formless chaos. She walked on autopilot. One thought repeated in her head. Get away. Jay was talking, but his voice sounded distant, like he was speaking through water. They're everywhere, she whispered, not recognizing her own voice. Jay's gaze darkened. Claire, there's no one here. She stopped dead. You didn't see them? Jay shook his head. You don't understand. Her breathing hitched. She didn't finish, because she realized. He couldn't see them. Her fingers dug into his sleeve. Her eyes darted through the crowd, searching. Nothing. Just regular people. Tourists, commuters, station workers. Everything looked normal. But the feeling of being watched never left, because she knew they were still here. London carried on as usual. Tourists, red buses, the clang of bicycle bells, the smell of street food. Claire walked fast, her breathing uneven, her pulse hammering in her ears. Jay kept pace beside her, throwing her worried glances. They turned into a narrow alleyway. And that's when it happened. The footsteps behind them changed. Before, they had blended into the city's noise, but here, in the quiet alley, they stood out. 1, 2, 1, 2. Jay heard it too. His pace slowed. He glanced over his shoulder. Empty alley, but the sound didn't stop. Claire, what the hell? She didn't let him finish. She grabbed his wrist. She squeezed so hard her nails dug into his skin. Run! They ran like hell. Claire didn't know where. It didn't matter. Anywhere. Just away. But no matter how fast they ran, the footsteps never fell behind. Always the same distance. Steady, unhurried, like he knew she had nowhere to go. They reached a bridge. To one side, the river. To the other, tall buildings. No one followed them. No guards. Just 2 terrified people trapped in something that made no sense. Claire exhaled shakily, her fists clenched. They aren't real, right? Her voice wavered with desperation. Jay was silent. In the distance, amidst the crowd, someone stood still. Even from here, Claire could feel his stare. She didn't know how long they wandered before they finally returned to the hotel. All she wanted was to lock herself away, but the second the door shut behind them, the silence in the room felt wrong. Claire moved toward the window. London sprawled before her, oblivious. Her own reflection looked blurry against the glass. And then she realized it wasn't just her reflection. Someone else was there. Behind her, tall, motionless, red coat, black bearskin hat, watching. Claire didn't scream. She didn't have time. The next morning, hotel staff talked about the missing girl. The police found no signs of forced entry, no disturbed belongings, The bed hadn't even been slept in. She had simply vanished. Jay was questioned, but he had no answers. The last thing he remembered, they returned to the hotel, and she said she wanted to be alone. He left. No one saw her again. A few days later, at Buckingham Palace, tourists gathered to watch the changing of the guard. The red uniforms, the precise steps, the solemn faces, and among them, a new guardsman. His face seemed strangely familiar, but no one could quite remember why.